Capable of unparalleled firepower, the Heavy Destroyer is one of the deadliest ships ever forged by a Covenant shipyard, an unrelenting engine of violence and destruction, typically crewed by shamed, forsaken warriors who were twisted of mind and deemed unsuitable for service in conventional fleets. Executioner vessels like these were capable of single-handedly crushing an entire human fleet, leaving nothing in its wake but a grave of unrecognizable debris and bodies. Hey people, Mark here, and welcome to another ship breakdown. Today we're talking about the Covenant's Sonaris Pattern Heavy Destroyer, and if you like this video, please subscribe and like and all that jazz if you wanna. If you really like, you can leave a super chat if it's within your means. I'm trying to pay for a master's degree in America, so yeah. I have a quick correction for my last video though. I do not know a lot about the military, to clarify. I know a lot about Halo lore, so when I do know some little bits of actual information, I try to sprinkle it in because I find it interesting. I had been told years ago that aircraft carriers had a large amount of missiles in lieu of the guns you'd find on something the layman would refer to as a battleship. I'm aware battleships as a class have fallen out of popular use and the US Navy doesn't use them anymore, but it's still a colloquial term to generally refer to Navy warships, and I'm dumbing things down so as to not make any more mistakes. Aircraft carriers do not have loads of missiles. What I found was a video of a self-defense system that the aircraft carrier had. Sources are the Essential Visual Guide, Halo Wars, Envoy, the Encyclopedia, and Warfleet. Here we go. The CPV-Class Heavy Destroyer, as it is known by the UNSC, stands out among Covenant ships, trading their typical flat, curvy aesthetic for a jagged, lopsided, downright alien look, even among alien ships. At some angles, it sort of looks like a flying squid. Like all Covenant vessels, the Sonaris pattern is not built in the traditional sense. Its components are grown in humongous assembly forges, pieced together over time by clouds of nanomachine swarms. The nano-laminate plating on the Sonaris that the Covenant was so fond of was just so, and lightweight but extremely durable, and is of course reinforced by the energy shields typical of Covenant vessels. The ship measures in at 1,664 meters, deceptively large, as it dwarfs some cruisers like the Xanar pattern. As is typical of Covenant warships, the Sonaris pattern is capable of much faster and more precise slip-space jumps than its UNSC counterparts, and a large segment of the ship is dominated by its massive pinch fusion drive. Two secondary pinch fusion drives hang from the rear. Together, they power all weapons, repulsor engines, and auxiliary systems. These fusion drives are more efficient and provide far more energy than anything humanity has yet developed, but are highly volatile. As fusion rather than fission drives, they replicate the conditions of the core of a star, fusing atomic nuclei. With poor upkeep, they can detonate with the output of a small supernova. The crew consisted of 4 superiors who would perform the duties of a typical bridge crew, in answer to, most likely, this is just my assumption, it's not listed, a single shipmaster, who would in turn take orders from the fleet master or anyone above them. The ship was assigned 2 Hiragaks for maintenance, and 400 menials to carry out any labor needed to service the ship. These menials would take the form of Ungoi jackals and maybe disgraced Sanghili. Their complement includes up to 50 obedientaries, roughly equivalent to the UNSC's commissioned officers, most likely elite majors, ultras, etc. 100 warriors, these would be the elite miners, brutes, high-ranking Ungoi or Kigyar, and a whopping 1,900 thralls. This rate consists of probably exclusively the Ungoi and Yanmei troops on board. The Heavy Destroyer served no role except violence, had no design goal in mind except military expediency, and was apparently the predominant offensive ship used by the hegemony. They were the first in line for glassing duty, as many shipmasters either deemed the work distasteful or beneath them, failing to see the honor in squashing bugs. The crews were cobbled together out of disgraced warriors who had committed acts of disobedience or disloyalty, but not enough to be branded heretic, as well as those considered unsuitable or too unstable for service in regular ministry fleets. The shipmasters of these ships were no exception, and many saw usage of the Sonaris pattern as their only possible path to redemption. As such, these ships were dispatched to far-flung front lines, out of sight and mind of the prophets of high charity, with the exception of one who had a penchant for making use of those considered undesirable. The ships were deemed too dangerous for use during times of peace. As such, they were only deployed as an act of desperation or irresponsibility. The destroyers were often escorted by the aforementioned Xanar pattern, the CRS-class light cruiser, as well as ADP-class escorts and SDV-class heavy corvettes. The crews of these escorts were very undedicated to their task, the reputation of the heavy destroyers doing them no favors in drumming up fervor for their shipmaster. The result being that their reluctant guards could only be counted on for the most basic of defensive maneuvers. It's due to this, and the up-close and personal nature of their common assignments, that many human worlds are littered with the detritus of these heavy destroyers. Their work is often considered suicidal, and with the disgraced commanders at the helm, they rushed headlong and gleefully to their ends in pursuit of redemption and glory. Sounds familiar. The primary armament of the Sonaris Pattern Heavy Destroyer is twofold. For naval combat, 2 Aljordan pattern plasma beam emitters. We've discussed plasma lances before. These incomprehensibly hot beams of liquid plasma are able to cut through UNSC ships like butter, with the drawback that they require lots of energy to fire, but that's typically not an issue for these really efficient engines. But on older ships like the Hikarta pattern blockade runner, they could overload their systems and shut them down if they weren't careful. For bombardment, 1 Infernus pattern super heavy excavation beam can be found below the furnace, the main pinch fusion reactor. This was the primary instrument of destruction used in cleanup operations, and they've been known to get started whether friendlies are on the ground or not. Assisted by 40 Karnax Et pattern plasma bombardment mortars. These would help in tenderizing the landscape while keeping any would-be ground assaults at bay, while the 20 Gone pattern pulse lasers work point defense, shooting any fighters or missiles that get too close down. When in close range to an enemy ship, the plasma lance alone may not be ideal, so 24 Melusian pattern heavy plasma cannons and 6 Jate pattern plasma torpedo silos also adorn the hull. This armament allows the destroyer to contend with ships far beyond the weight class of their UNSC destroyer counterparts like cruisers and carriers. And while we're comparing, the Sonaris Pattern Heavy Destroyer measures in at about 3.5 Halberd-class light destroyers or 3.2 Hillsborough-class heavy destroyers long. There were many ships of this class we know of that fought in the War of Annihilation against the humans, many of which were commanded by Ripa Morami, the Arbiter before Thel 'Vadam. Ripa was a dangerously unstable Sangheli, highly devoted to the Great Journey, but prone to violence and reckless behavior. The Prophet of Regret, the most impulsive of the 3 hierarchs, pardoned him when he was imprisoned for a failed coup against his Kaidan on his homeworld of Malarok. It should be noted that violence between Sangheli, especially over Kaidan ship, is nothing new or out of the ordinary. Ripa's greatest crime was that he tried and failed. Anyway, the Prophet of Regret branded him Arbiter due to his partiality toward ruthlessness, a trait which Regret could sympathize with. He was given command of the Fleet of Glorious Interdiction, which consisted of several Sonaris and Ket patterns, and began to serve as the Hierarch's, particularly Regret's, personal enforcer. Radiant Perception was a member of this fleet and played an important role in the Battle of Arcadia. As the Spirit of Fire pursued Ripa Morami to Trove, a Forerunner shield world, then Commander Lord Hood of the Halcyon-class cruiser Roman Blue was tasked with retrieving the log buoy it left behind, which contained the details of the long-distance slipspace jump that the Spirit was taking. The Roman Blue never retrieved that buoy. Instead, an enraged Lord Hood attacked the Radiant Perception. Between Hood's rage-guided assault and the superior firepower of the Sonaris pattern, the Roman Blue was quickly overwhelmed and forced to retreat, leaving the log buoy and the Spirit of Fire at the mercy of space. The log buoy would be recovered after the war by Orion Forge, daughter of John Forge, within the wreckage of the Radiant Perception, guarded by a particularly large and aggressive hunter, a member of the complement whose bond brother had either been lost in the crash or died in the ensuing mutiny. Whatever the case, the hunter had killed all the other survivors. Proclamation's Tithe was the Sonaris famous for colliding with the Spirit of Fire and hammering it at close range. It was ordered to intercept the Spirit upon its emergence from the entrance portal, news that was conveyed to Ripa Morami via this unfortunate elite.
Arbiter, a human ship has arrived and is closing in on the entrance portal. Get the Hierarch to High Charity.
Is he dead? Why didn't he move afterwards? Is he playing dead so the Arbiter doesn't hit him again? Anyway, the ship was sent to confront the modified Phoenix, but due to the unparalleled strategic ability of Captain Cutter, and the fact that it happened off-screen, the Spirit was able to escape into the vast interior of Trove. The reverence and the esteem were both Sonaris patterns that sent taunting messages to the Pillar of Autumn during the fall of Reach. The reverence sent, "You slave, toil, bleed, and sweat for your food, and we shall eat it." And the esteem sent, "You will not know where we have struck you until you have fallen." The Covenant aren't great shit-talkers. Hekab was a loyal chieftain that served throughout the war, and afterward attempted several power grabs. Most notably, he tried to make use of the Sharkoi, a feat that no one, not Hekab, not Bungie, and not 343 have actually successfully done. The 2 Sonaris patterns under the command of Hekab were Fighter's Blood and Hammerstrike, both of which were destroyed by the forces of Thars Sarav, a Sangheili warlord, but the Karo conflict would be a topic for an entirely different video. Bloodied Spirit was also a Sonaris pattern that was controlled by Jiralhane during the Great Schism. As a part of the Fleet of Particular Justice, the ship was among the first vessels to attack Earth, alongside the Prophet of Regret. After being left behind when the Prophet of Regret fled to Delta Halo, Blue Team, with the exception of John 117 and Kelly 087, and the addition of William 043, fought in the Battle of Havana. At the conclusion of the battle, Blue Team commandeered Bloodied Spirit and traveled to Onyx at the behest of Dr. Halsey, and the ship was destroyed by the highly aggressive Onyx Sentinels. The weaknesses of the Sonaris pattern are not apparent, much like most Covenant ships, and they outmatch almost all human ships to a degree that it's hard to determine what problems, if any, the ship may have. The one that is the most egregious, however, isn't a flaw in the ship's design or armament, but in its reputation. The escorts of this ship know who is on these things. The fleet masters don't want them around. This leads to them being sent to do the tedious, dangerous, or otherwise undesirable tasks with guards that don't really care about their well-being. To make matters worse, the crew are assembled from the worst troops you can find from a temperament or track record point of view. These social stigmas take a ship that is otherwise fine or quite good by Covenant standards and make it perform worse when compared to cruisers or carriers that they should be able to keep up with by all accounts. This is one of my favorite Covenant ships, if not my favorite or second favorite. I love this ship. The crew being a bunch of ex-cons and failures, the ship being built for killing and nothing more, the fact that the crew and shipmasters are all failures and seeking some measure of redemption, and the ship is introduced in a fleet commanded by an arbiter is just ooh, and it looks so unique. One of the biggest issues with Covenant ships is that all cruisers look like other cruisers, all carriers look like other carriers, but this thing just looks like no other ship in the entire Navy. And it would be the most crusty, grimy little prophet that employed them. Seriously, the narrative utilization of this ship was on point. The only issue I have with it is, like all things Halo, I wish there was more of it. But that's all I got. If you like this and you want more alien ship breakdowns, let me know in the comments, but for now, here are my breakdowns on the Banished Dreadnought and the Sangheili Blockade Runner. Peace.